So, moving on, we got some more University of Maryland family about to speak to you all. Somebody who you might be well familiar with. Dr. Sharon Fries-Britt is the Associate Professor in the College of Education here at University of Maryland and the current Director of the Higher Education, Student Affairs, and International Education Program in the Department of Counseling, Higher Education, and Special Education. Her research examines the experiences of high-achieving blacks in higher education and underrepresented minorities in STEM fields, as well as the experiences of underrepresented faculty in higher education. Dr. Fries-Britt has published within peer-reviewed journals, and her research has been funded and supported by the Lumina Foundation and the National Society of Black Physicists. For more than 30 years, she has been a sought-after speaker, consulting extensively with colleges and universities, governmental agencies, and private industry on issues of race, equity, diversity, and effective leadership. She is a recipient of numerous awards, including the Association for the Study of Higher Education Mentoring Award in 2011. Speaking on cultivating the imprint in your soul, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Sharon Fries-Britt.
Good afternoon. What does it mean to cultivate the imprint in your soul? Let me set the context by sharing a story with you. And this is a story about a very distinguished group of researchers. And they had heard about a remote island halfway around the world. And they decided to apply for a grant. Smart thing to do if you're a faculty member. They received funding to go study the people on this island. They were very excited when they heard that they were going to have this opportunity. So they contacted the island and explained that they wanted to come spend 5 days. They only had 5 days to gather as much research as they could to learn about the inhabitants of the island. So when they arrived on the first day, they spent that day just talking to the elders because they decided it might be prudent to hire some native guides while they were there. Since they only had these 5 days, maybe we ought to hire some people who know the island really well, who can show us where we need to go to collect our data. And thus they did. So the first day they met with these native guides and they said, here's what we're trying to do. We're a group of researchers who do X kind of work. We're going to be working long hours, needing to go lots of places. The native guides just sort of nodded as if to understand what these science researchers needed. So on the very next day, they started their research. They met the native guides right outside the hotel, 7 a.m. in the morning. The guides were ready and energetic and ready to take them. They took them to the east side of the island. And on the east side of the island, they introduced them to the elders. They met the children. They went to the religious facilities. They learned so much about the island. They were impressed with all the data and information they were collecting. In fact, they stayed all day, well past dinner time. By the time they got back to the hotel, the only thing they could do was fall asleep and prepare for the next day. And so the next day, the second day of their data collection, they came out 7 a.m. in the morning as planned, and there stood their native guides, energized, ready to go. They took them to the west side of the island, and they proceeded to meet the elders there, the children there, the parents. They attended several cultural fests, and the scientists were beginning to understand that the west side was slightly different from the east side. Even though they were all on the same island, they were beginning to tease out slight, subtle differences. They continued this process for the next couple of days. Day 3 and 4, they went to the south side and the north side, and they did the same thing. In fact, by the time they were on the 4th day, they were starting to feel very exhausted collecting all this data, and they knew they were getting tired, but they were beginning to understand that the center of the island was where the real understanding of these people was held. And so they woke up that morning excited about getting ready to go, came out at 7 a.m. like they had been doing the entire time, and when they came outside the door of the hotel, they didn't see the native guides. One of the scientists looked over and saw them squatting under a tree, refusing to move. Now, the scientists had not seen this behavior over the last 4 days, so obviously they were puzzled. The senior scientist, the full professor, walked over to the guides and said, excuse me, we need to get moving. This is our last day. We've learned that the center of the island really holds the key to understanding the people here. Could you please, kind of basically hurry it up, right? The native senior guide looked up at this senior scientist and said, today we shall rest to let our souls catch up with our bodies. Let me tell you why I love this story. This story, to me, really contains a lot of information about how you and I navigate the unfolding journey of our lives. I have had, like you, the pleasure to meet a lot of people in my life. People who have mentored me, my parents, siblings, people I've been raised with, students, many students over the years that I've had the privilege to learn from in reciprocal relationships, all kinds of people in the U.S., outside of the U.S., and even though we all know every single one of us is distinctly unique and talented, so we have that distinction, there's a lot of strands that cut across all of who we are. We are all similar also in many, many ways. And let me just share one. And that similarity is trying to figure out our lives. What is this? And I would say to you that we all have the researcher in us who's, should I go to this school, get this, if I take this class from that professor, maybe I'll get a recommendation for that. Oh, you know what? I need to go get a job over there because that'll lead to a job here. That's the researcher part of you, trying to figure it out. And usually the researcher part of us is outside of ourselves, trying to measure up to somebody else's idea, right? But the native part of you begins to understand after a while, you're running yourself a little raggedy, trying to keep up, trying to do all the, quote, right things. And so the native side has its way of letting you know that you need to rest and let your soul catch up. The imprint that has to be cultivated in us can't be cultivated over here all the time. It has to be informed by this, but you can't know what your purpose is and where you're going if you're not cultivating the relationship here. So my fearless idea is that we spend more time. What if you every day decided that you would do something that allows you to rest, to know your imprint, so that your soul catches up with your body? That's a fearless idea. Because every great scientist, she or he in this world, spent a lot of time on this side as much as this side. Because when you're on navigating both spaces, you're really into understanding all ways of knowing. Sometimes we're in a place in our lives where people are only going to privilege the knowing that you get to know over here. Did you write an article about it? Did you do a report? What do you know? How many books have you written on it? All important questions, right? We would all agree. We're in the academy, totally understand. But there are some things that you can't know that way. Let me share with you a couple examples of how I think you can begin to understand and cultivate the imprint in your soul. There's no magic list, by the way. There's a lot of things. I'm sharing this list because it comes born out of experience, but also out of understanding that other people have shared similar kinds of things in their lives. The first is, I think we have to always be about self-study. You are not the same self you were when you were born. You're not the same self you were last year. I have a 16-year-old. Trust me, selves change regularly. Okay? And your parents know you changed regularly. We are not the same self. So the self standing here today before you as a grown woman is not the self that was an undergrad at Maryland in 1977. Sounds like ancient history, but you'll be there one day. So we are always changing. The second thing I would say to you is that you have to have a lot of courage to cultivate the imprint in your soul. You have to have courage and you have to have practice at it. And the reason why you have to have courage is because when you start understanding who you are, you're going to not be able to be somebody else. Sounds simple, but guess what? What may come out of you as ideas, as notions, as the way you see the island of your life, the community you come from, the understanding of the landscape, you know when it's time for you to go in, everyone's not going to get that. But you get that, and you're not. So it takes courage because people may not necessarily like the new you or understand the evolving nature of you. The third one is probably my favorite. I think we absolutely have to befriend the storms in our lives and the vulnerabilities. Now, I know people talk about this all the time because that's actually where imprint, the soul part of who we are, really reveals itself. And let me share just a couple with you. I started talking about the term, the notion, the word of vulnerability. I can tell you exactly when I started talking about it. 1998 to 1999. That's the year my daughter was born. And my family was catapulted into transplant world. We knew nothing about transplants. I was a mother looking over the 40 line. What that means is just before I turned 40, I had a baby, okay? And at that time, my daughter was born very healthy, very whole, very vibrant child. But she was born in the month of December. Bad virus season. She caught a virus, it attacked her liver, and within 2 weeks, we were being told she's got a serious illness. Fast forward, at 13 months, 1 year plus 1 month, we were waiting for her to turn 13 months so that she could get a transplant for a liver, or she would have not made it to age 2. Now, that space of vulnerability on the outside looked crazy to people. I had just left administration and was just starting a tenure-track faculty position. Like I was only in a couple years in that. I had to use all of my ways of knowing to navigate this space. So trust me when I tell you my researcher skills and talking to the hospital staff at Johns Hopkins University and finding out information and going online and figuring out liver levels and what was important, I knew how to do that. Okay, I wrote articles in the ICU unit. I was capable of that, but that did not sustain me. What sustained me was my native guide, the person that I knew, the place from which I came, the island of people who supported me, east side, west side, south, and north, and the center of my life. They're the people who helped me to understand and helped me knit it all back together. And so we have to befriend the storms, and we have to understand that they're there to grow us and to teach us. The last one, very briefly, I'll tell you, was one of my greatest fears. One of my greatest fears in life was the loss of my mother in particular, both parents. I was raised by both parents. But, I was super close to my mother. Super, super close. And I used to say to all my friends, if my mother dies tomorrow, you're going to have to scrape my butt up off the ground because I am not going to be able to survive. That's what I thought. It was one of my clear fears. At the age of 49, my daughter was 10 years old, so she had lived long enough to have the blessing of my mother in her life. I stood in the ICU unit, wiping the blood from my mother's mouth as she transitioned. And in the moment of doing that, I realized, now my siblings thought I had lost my last bit of mind. The moment of doing that, I said to my mother, I'm standing in the gap that I was afraid to be in. And the release of that, the understanding of that, really cemented and helped me to understand the imprint in me, what I was made of, what I was here to do and understand, that I was developing an understanding of the complexity of lives. So from the child I brought into the earth to the woman who brought me, I've been blessed to face the vulnerabilities of their lives to blend into my own. Let me say the last one is that I think ultimately our real challenge is to give it all away, is to give, in other words, to cultivate other people. Once we have gotten to where we feel a sense of who we are, the blending of this, the understanding of this, what purpose does it serve if you're only serving you? If you're all about serving you, well, okay, we'll watch you. But it's really about saying, equip me enough so that I can help other people find out who they are, so I can be of service, so I can be of help, so that I can be an instrument in their exploration of their lives. I'm going to close with a story that I hope will illustrate this in the smallest of ways, but in a powerful way, I hope. And this is a story about a father who was teaching his young daughter how to water the garden and how to care for the garden and how to cultivate the garden. My husband's been doing a lot of gardening lately, and I've learned from, first of all, he brings home some slamming food. So if you want good food, come to my house. But in the garden, it takes a lot. You have to order good quality seeds. You have to be out there. It's back-breaking work. So this father was showing his daughter how to do gardening. And what he did is he gave her an age-appropriate task. She was 5, 6 years old. He said, oh, honey, I want you to just water. Great hose. She's watering. She's feeling pride, excitement. She's watering the yard. All of a sudden, the father hears, Daddy, it's not working. It's not working. Here's the frustration in her voice. He looks over and he sees the problem right away. Comes over and he says, sweetie, the problem is you've got your right foot on the hose. And he proceeded to explain to her how the pressure of her body was blocking the flow of the water. And so therefore, she wasn't getting any results. And so as soon as he took her foot off and she saw, she's right back, she's 5, 6, she's back happily doing her thing. About 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later, he hears her again. Daddy, it's not working. He comes and looks, and he immediately saw the problem, and she had her left foot on the hose. Sometimes in our lives, you and I keep repeating the same things, and in the early parts of our lives, we need help. We need somebody to guide us. And oftentimes, we're in positions, wherever you land in your life, whatever you plan to do, you're going to see what someone might need help on. And you might be like, well, they got to figure it out. I figured it out on my own. Took me 3 years. I'm not going to give them the answer in 2 weeks. Our lives should be about giving it away eventually. so that you can really have something that you've contributed to. As you move through your life and the navigation of the sciences, the researcher in you, and the native understanding of who you are, it's the blending them, it's the cultivating an understanding of their all ways of knowing. Not only do I know you're going to be successful, you're going to be deeply engaged in the kind of work that you do. Some of our greatest minds in the world have always been engaged in both sides of that. Albert Einstein, a well-renowned name that everyone knows, literally gave us so many gifts out of his life. And one of the things that he said about science is that it can be summed up in understanding that the whole of science is about the refining of everyday ideas. The whole of science, all of it. I don't care what college you're in. The whole of it is in the refining of everyday ideas. What's more everyday than you thinking about how you're doing and what you're contributing? Are you refining those ideas? Because if you don't refine those ideas, you're not going to find fearless ideas. And finally, he left us with a notion of saying, when he was being interviewed about his research and his life's work, when talking about the universe and his exploration of the universe, he said, something is deeply hidden in the universe. He didn't have the answer, but he knew something was deeply hidden. I would argue that he discovered that when he was on his native side. Thank you so much.